The recent lifting of Chinese tariffs on Australian wine has been good news for the country's vineyards. Trade ties had been hit after Beijing's crackdown on Australian exports over political disagreements. While things are getting back to normal, it has highlighted the delicate nature of economic relations between the two countries. Roger Maynard with this report.
Like winemakers all over the country, Bruce Tyrrell has had a tough 3 years when Beijing effectively pulled the plug on imports of Australia's wine by imposing tariffs of over 200%. Vineyards like his lost a combined $1.2 billion worth of business. For the man whose family founded this vineyard in 1858, it was a big blow.
The industry in general has been hit very hard. You know, about a third of Australian wine was going to China. It was the most wonderful market. Everyone was riding the dragon.
Now Australia is facing a glut with the equivalent of 3 billion bottles of wine stored in tanks and barrels. It'll take time to shift that quantity of stock, even though most vineyards have managed to find new markets.
Yeah, the last 12 months we've opened 6 new markets. However, the 6 of those markets put together are not as big as China.
The lifting of Chinese tariffs, while encouraging for winemakers like Bruce, does raise questions about the future of trade ties between Australia and China. In a world where politics and the unexpected can so easily have a negative impact on economic relations, no nation or business can afford to assume markets will remain the same.
The most important thing to remember when it comes to China is that what matters to China is China. China sees Australia and its trade relations not only with Australia but with countries around the world as simply a way of serving China's needs.
I don't think either Beijing or Canberra wants to return to the dysfunction of the 2020 through to 2023. So you've got both sides agreeing that we want to handle the differences the two sides have constructively, and they want to prioritise areas of mutual interest, which is very much trade. We've got the Australian Trade Minister saying that we currently do $300 billion worth of two-way trade with China, but there's no reason why that can't be $400 billion. So that's a signal out of Canberra.
Bruce Tyrrell is keen to get back into business with China as soon as possible, but it clearly won't happen overnight. With the Chinese economy slowing, consumer demand for Australia's vintage crop may also fall. Then there's the question of confidence. While Australian wine growers are clearly happy about the lifting of Chinese tariffs, it doesn't necessarily mean that trade will automatically return to normal soon. Many vineyards have had their fingers badly burned over the past 3 years and may be reluctant to rely so heavily on a seemingly attractive market in the near future. Roger Maynard, CNA, in the Hunter Valley, north of Sydney.
And for more insight, Tomohiko Taniguchi joins us now. He is Special Advisor to the Fujitsu Future Studies Center and also a specially appointed professor at the University of Tsukuba. And also joining us this evening is Professor Ho Lok Sang. He's Director of the Pan Su Tong Shanghai Hong Kong Economic Policy Research Institute at Lingnan University. Well, warm welcome to both of you. Well, I'm going to start the first question by getting both your insights, but perhaps we'll start with you first, Professor Ho. Now, China's use of trade leverage appears to be a major component of its foreign policy. How successful do you think it's been in the eyes of Beijing?
Well, first of all, I would argue that what China did was not an act of economic coercion, because economic coercion typically would be a proactive way of forcing one's trading partner or another country, to do things that the country wants. In the case of China, it's in that particular incident, I recall that it was, in the first place, Australia had taken a lead in lobbying the Five Eyes partners to exclude Huawei from supplying 5G technology. You see, and I think it's an act of coercion in the first place, from the perspective of China, from US, and then the Australia chose, to comply with America's requirement, And I think that's as an act of self-defense rather than an act of coercion.
So, Professor Taniguchi here, do you want to jump in? Do you agree with Professor Ho that it's not economic coercion, but it's self-defense?
I think I have just heard a very much unique Chinese way of defining economic coercion. In the layman's term, economic coercion is to use your power of consumption. Supposing that you are a big nation, your consumer market is big, and that is being weaponized and leveraged in bullying countries such as Australia. Japan is no exception. Japan is under coercive act the Chinese have continued as against Japanese fishery products.
Professor Ho, do you think there are limits then to,
Yes.
well, in your words, self-defense?
Of course, there are limits to economic coercion. For example, in the case of Huawei, as you know, Huawei has been economically coerced to a very large extent, because so many countries have been invited or handpicked, by America, to exclude Huawei, and it's causing huge damage, and there are so many other Chinese companies that are hurting, because of these sanctions. And consider Xinjiang, Xinjiang, didn't do anything wrong, and according to independent auditors, actually there was no such a thing as forced labor, and yet Volkswagen couldn't get its cars into America, because it was argued that there are some components that were products of forced labor. But Volkswagen had independent auditors certifying that there was no such a thing. So I think Volkswagen was economically coerced, to comply with America, So I think in that case, I would also argue that the damage, to Xinjiang and Huawei, of course, was quite real in the first instance, But depending on the capacity of Xinjiang, China, and Huawei, they have withstood these coercions pretty well. Xinjiang has been growing faster than other provinces, and Huawei has bounced back. And that is because, they have very strong resilience. And in a way, because they are doing so well, some countries are frightened. The competitors try to use alternative ways, to compete.
I would like to bring in Professor Taniguchi here now, just to pick up on this point, what Professor Ho is saying. On top of that, countries like Australia, for instance, as a middle power, you do have to sort of balance the benefits of trade with China against the risks of political tensions and trade leverage. It's a tight rope to walk, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is a tight rope to walk.
Things are doing pretty well now. Coming back to normal.
You're not supposed to speak at the moment, Professor.
Professor,
it's my turn.
Yeah, let's give way to Professor Taniguchi, please. Please go ahead.
Sure.
Okay, but one must admit that this sort of tendency is not going to go away. This is here to stay, and it's going to be repeated again and again whenever you make some remarks, such as a former Prime Minister of Australia about the origin of COVID-19, or whenever things happen, such as Japan's treated water, disseminated treated water, about which the safety is proven by a Chinese scientist, including the Chinese scientist of the IAEA. So no rationale here. When you have a response from the Chinese government with no rational reason, that's economic coercion. And I think it's going to continue for some time in our life. So we've got to live with that. Although Japan has lost a significant number and amount of fishery products exported to China, compensating that is the growth of other markets. the United States, Taiwan, and Philippines, and Vietnam. So the net damage caused on Japanese fishing industry has been minimal. So those are the things that nations around China, trading with China, must do. I say it's the best way for China to lose your friends.
Yeah, so Professor Ho, your thoughts on that? I mean, in self-defense or so-called economic retaliation, how has that changed how foreign countries perceive their relations with China? Is that a point that you agree with Professor Taniguchi?
Yes, my point is that China has tried to make friends with people, with America, with Japan, with Korea, with all the neighboring countries, but of course, there are times when there are disagreements, but then for the disagreements, we can come and talk and try to find some way out, and instead, China finds itself economically coerced, by strong powers like America, especially America, because America has the capability of getting its allies, to comply with its demands.
Professor Taniguchi, what are the, I suppose, the potential consequences of China's slowing economy on Australian exports, and how can the businesses there adapt to these changes?
One thing that I have to say is there is absolutely no fantasized and romanticized views held by the Japanese business people, business leaders. And they're eager to find other ways to do businesses instead of China. They're trying to find other locations where they could do businesses. And some of the Japanese companies are divesting from China and bringing their operations back in Japan. So that's also one trend that will continue to be in place.
All right, I've just got a final question to both of you. Perhaps, Professor Ho, you can start first. How do you think international trade agreements and institutions can help promote more stable economic relations?
Yes. In some cases, it is possible to bring it to WTO. But you may recall that in one instance, America simply disregarded, this opportunity of intervention, by the WTO or arbitration by WTO because it just boycotted it. So I think as far as economic coercion is concerned, America is actually the leader, and as you can refer to this book, the American Trap, by this French executive, and that is very clear, that because America is very powerful, and it's only powerful countries that can exert economic coercion. China is not really as powerful as America, by far.
Professor Taniguchi, some last words?
Okay. Professor Ho said that countries in dispute should talk, but the Chinese have rarely spoken with any other nations, such as Taiwan, Japan, Australia, Vietnam, Lithuania, against which China is imposing its economic bullying coercion tactics. And there has been no attempts whatsoever from the Beijing side to the call from Tokyo to actually sit down and discuss the fishery products that have been banned from entering the Chinese market.
Well, very many thanks for that candid discussion. Really appreciate your time
Taiwan is
and
recognized
thoughts.
as a province of China.
Professor Ho, yeah, we have run out of time, but thank you once again, both of you. Tomohiko Taniguchi there from University of Tsukuba, as well as Special Advisor to the Fujitsu Future Studies Center, as well as Professor Ho Lok Sang from Lin Nan University.